The first time I realized my wife was lying to me, it wasn't because I caught her with another man. It was because my own brother looked relieved when he thought I didn't know. That feeling hit me in the chest like pressure, slow and heavy, the kind that doesn't go away when you breathe through it. I was standing in my kitchen, still in my work shoes, listening to the hum of the fridge and the sound of my wife, Megan, laughing in the other room. It was an easy laugh. Too easy. The kind she hadn't used with me in months. I'm not the paranoid type. I don't check phones. I don't interrogate timelines. I'm 41 years old. I work in risk management, and my whole life has been built on the idea that if something matters, you verify it once, and then you trust the numbers. Megan and I had been married 12 years. No kids. Plenty of shared plans. I thought trust was the one thing we never had to negotiate. Lately, everything felt negotiated. She'd started moving through the house like a guest instead of someone who lived there. Conversations stayed shallow. Physical touch felt scheduled. When I talked about my day, she nodded without hearing me. When my younger brother Ryan came over, she leaned forward. Ryan had always been the easier one, the charming one. Growing up, he broke rules and got forgiven. I followed rules and got measured. We were close enough as adults, or so I thought. He came by for dinner sometimes. He helped Megan with her laptop, her phone, anything that gave them an excuse to sit close and talk quietly while I poured drinks. That night, I came home early. No warning. No text. Just me, my keys, and a bad mood I couldn't explain. Megan didn't hear me come in. She was on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, voice low. I know, she said. I just need more time. He still believes me. I stood there longer than I should have. When she turned and saw me, her face changed in a way I had never seen before. Not guilt. Calculation. She smiled and said it was her friend Claire. I smiled back. That was the moment something inside me went cold. Over the next few weeks, the pieces didn't scream. They whispered. Late nights. Locked screens. A second email account she forgot to log out of on the tablet. My mother asking strange questions about my temper, my availability, my priorities. Ryan canceling plans at the last minute, then showing up at my house when he thought I wasn't home. I started paying attention without letting anyone see me pay attention. I stopped reacting. I started recording details in my head the way I do at work. Dates, patterns, shifts in behavior. Megan began treating me like an obstacle she needed to manage instead of a husband she respected. One Sunday, we had dinner at my parents' house. Normal food. Forced smiles. My mother looked at Megan with sympathy I hadn't earned. Halfway through the meal, she said maybe we'd rushed into marriage. Maybe some people just weren't built to give enough emotionally. Megan didn't defend me. Ryan stared at his plate. That was the night I checked the router logs. The night I realized there was a device in my house I didn't own. The night I understood that what was happening wasn't an accident or a mistake. It was coordinated. I didn't confront anyone. Not Megan. Not Ryan. Not my family. I sat in my car afterward, hands on the steering wheel, watching the house I grew up in through the windshield. For the first time in my life, I wasn't angry. I was focused, and I knew one thing for sure. Whatever they thought they were doing to me, they had already underestimated how patient I could be. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was wired or panicking, but because sleep felt irresponsible. Like closing my eyes while someone was emptying my house. I lay there next to Megan, listening to her breathe, steady and calm, like she had nothing to hide. I tried to remember when I stopped recognizing the person beside me. I couldn't. The next morning, she kissed my cheek before work. It was light, careful, the kind of kiss you give when you're already gone. I waited until her car backed out of the driveway. Then I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I didn't start with emotions. I started with facts. I pulled credit reports, bank statements, shared accounts. I checked login histories the way I check exposure models at work. What I saw didn't blow up all at once. It stacked. Small withdrawals, new passwords, notifications rerouted. Megan wasn't stealing yet. She was preparing. By noon, I knew she had spoken to a lawyer. Not hired one, just consulted. The appointment confirmation was buried in a calendar she thought I didn't have access to anymore. I also knew she'd been telling my mother things, framing things, painting me as distant, controlling, unpredictable. I read messages where my own mother reassured her that if things went bad, family would support the truth. That word sat heavy. Truth. Ryan's name started appearing everywhere once I knew where to look. Shared rides. Deleted call logs. A hotel reservation in a city neither of them had business in. My brother was careful, but he'd never had to be smart. He assumed loyalty where he didn't earn it. I felt something then. Not sadness. Not rage. A tightening. Like a door closing behind me. That evening, Megan acted normal. She asked about my day. She made dinner. She laughed at a joke I didn't finish telling. I watched her hands move, familiar and foreign at the same time. I wondered how long she'd been practicing this version of herself. After dinner, she went to shower. I stood in the hallway and listened to the water run. I unlocked her old phone, the one she kept powered off in the back of a drawer. No password change. She never thought I'd touch it again. The messages were cleanly organized. Too clean. Threads labeled with initials. Photos saved to cloud folders she thought were private. And there it was. Ryan's voice, sent as a note she'd replayed more than once. He's solid, he said. Predictable. That's why this works. I sat on the floor with that phone in my hand until the water stopped running. When Megan came out, wrapped in a towel, she looked at me and froze. She saw the phone. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She asked one question. How much do you know? That was when I understood the full shape of it. This wasn't an affair fueled by impulse. This was alignment. Strategy. A quiet agreement that I was the variable to remove. I told her nothing. I stood up, handed her the phone, and walked past her into the bedroom. She followed, talking fast now, saying things about timing, confusion, pressure. I let her talk because I needed to hear how easily she lied when cornered. She said Ryan made her feel understood. She said she'd been lonely. She said she never meant for it to go this far. Every word was designed to soften the ground under her feet. When she finally stopped, I looked at her and said the only honest thing I could. You should have finished it. Her face went pale. That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did I, but for very different reasons. Because while she lay there wondering how much control she'd lost, I was already planning how much I was about to take back. And Ryan had no idea I was coming for him next. Ryan didn't call for 3 days after that. That alone told me everything. If he thought Megan still had control, he would have checked in. If he thought I was bluffing, he would have tested it. Silence meant he was recalculating. I let him. Megan tried a different approach once panic set in. She became gentle, attentive. She cooked my favorite meals. She touched my arm when she passed me in the hallway. She started using words like we again, like that language still belonged to her. I watched it all without reacting. Detachment confused her more than anger ever could. At work, I requested time off I didn't need. I wanted freedom of movement. No patterns. No predictable schedule. I started backing up files, not just hers, but mine. I made copies of everything that mattered and stored them in places she would never think to look. By the end of the week, I knew exactly what our marriage was worth on paper and how fast I could dismantle it if I needed to. On Friday afternoon, my mother called. Her voice was warm, practiced. I'm worried about you, she said. You seem distant lately. I asked her who told her that. There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough. She said Megan was scared. She said maybe I should be more present. She said Ryan was concerned too, that he'd noticed I seemed withdrawn. That was the moment the last thread snapped. Hearing my brother's name used as a character witness against me felt surgical, clean, precise. I told my mother I was fine. I told her not to worry. I told her I loved her. Then I hung up and sat in my car for a long time without turning the engine on. That night, Ryan texted me. Casual. Light. He asked if I wanted to grab a beer. Said it had been too long. I stared at the message and felt something close to amusement. He still thought proximity gave him control. I told him sure. We met at a bar we'd been going to since our 20s. Same place. Same stools. He ordered for both of us like nothing had changed. He talked about work. About stress. About how hard relationships get after a while. He never mentioned Megan. He waited for me to bring her up. I didn't. Halfway through his second drink, I asked him a simple question. I asked him how long he'd been lying to me. He laughed. Too fast. He said I was being dramatic. He said I was imagining things. I leaned in and told him I knew about the hotel. I told him I knew about the second phone. I told him I knew he'd been helping Megan prepare for a divorce that would leave me exposed. His face changed then. Not guilt. Fear. He tried to justify it. Said it wasn't planned. Said feelings just happened. Said Megan was unhappy. He said I was strong enough to land on my feet. I paid the tab and stood up. You're right, I said. I am. He reached for my arm. I shook him off. As I walked out, I realized something important. Ryan wasn't my enemy because he wanted my wife. He was my enemy because he wanted my place, my stability, my role in the family. He didn't want to beat me. He wanted to replace me. That was fine, because replacements only work when the original is gone. And I wasn't going anywhere. The house changed after that. Not physically, but in the way silence moved through it. Megan stopped pretending. She didn't apologize anymore. She watched me the way you watch someone whose next move you can't predict. We passed each other like strangers sharing a hallway, both pretending the other didn't exist. I started documenting everything. Not obsessively. Precisely. Screenshots. Timestamps. Audio files. I installed a recorder in my car and another in my office at home. I didn't need drama. I needed leverage. Every conversation became evidence. Every slip of the tongue mattered. Megan made one mistake she didn't realize was fatal. She told me she was going to stay with a friend for a few days to clear her head. She packed lightly. Too lightly. I watched her pull out of the driveway and waited exactly 6 minutes before checking the shared location she forgot to disable. She wasn't at a friend's place. She was at Ryan's. That confirmation didn't hurt the way it should have. It simplified things. Ambiguity was gone. There was no version of this where reconciliation made sense anymore. There was only sequence. While she was gone, I changed nothing visible. I didn't lock her out. I didn't move her things. I let her believe she still had access. At the same time, I froze joint credit lines, redirected my income, and opened a new account under a trust my attorney helped me establish quietly. Everything legal. Everything clean. Yes, I hired a lawyer. Not the kind Megan consulted. Mine specialized in asset protection and contested divorce. He didn't ask me how I felt. He asked me what I wanted preserved. That was the right question. Ryan called 2 nights later. His tone was defensive, disguised as concern. He said Megan was emotional. Said maybe we all needed to talk like adults. I told him I agreed. I said family honesty mattered to me too. We scheduled dinner at my parents' house. The night before, Megan came home. She looked tired, stripped of confidence. She tried to hug me. I stepped back. That hurt her more than yelling would have. She said she needed to explain things. I told her explanations were a luxury she no longer had. At dinner, everything looked normal from the outside. Food on the table. My mother bustling around the kitchen. My father silent, watching. Ryan too attentive. Megan sitting close to him, pretending not to. Halfway through the meal, my mother said something about forgiveness. About how families survive storms when people are willing to admit their faults. She looked directly at me. I stood up. I connected my phone to the speaker on the counter. I didn't announce it. I didn't warn anyone. I just pressed play. Megan's voice filled the room first. Calm. Confident. Talking about strategy. About timing. About how she needed Ryan to make sure my mother stayed on her side. Then Ryan's voice. Laughing. Saying I wouldn't see it coming. Saying I'd accept whatever version of events they fed me because I always had. My mother went pale. My father pushed his chair back slowly. Megan started crying, real this time, because control was gone. Ryan tried to speak. I raised my hand, and he stopped. I told them all I wasn't there to argue. I told them I wasn't there to forgive. I told them I was there to correct the narrative before it hardened into something permanent. I left before dessert. Behind me, the family I thought I had finally collapsed under the weight of its own lies. And for the first time, I knew they understood something they never had before. I was done being managed. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came in waves, each one quieter and more damaging than the last. My mother didn't call for days. My father sent one short text telling me he needed time. Ryan tried twice and stopped when I didn't respond. Megan stayed in the house, but she no longer acted like it belonged to her. I moved through my days with deliberate calm. I went to work. I cooked for myself. I slept in the guest room. I didn't check on her, and I didn't ask where she was going. The absence of reaction unsettled her more than confrontation ever could. She wanted a fight. She needed me emotional. I gave her nothing. The legal process began quietly. Papers filed without drama. Accounts separated without announcement. My attorney handled communication, so I didn't have to. Megan received notices she didn't expect. The look on her face the first time she realized she was behind the curve told me everything. She had planned for chaos. She hadn't planned for precision. She tried to flip the script. She told mutual friends I was cold, that I'd shut down, that she was afraid of how detached I'd become. A few of them reached out. I listened. I didn't defend myself. I let the silence speak. People believe what they want at first. They change their minds when the story stops adding up. Ryan showed up at my office one afternoon. No warning. No invitation. Security called me before letting him up. I told them to send him away. Watching him stand there through the glass, looking smaller than I remembered, felt like closing a chapter one should have ended years ago. That night, Megan finally broke. She stood in the doorway of the guest room and asked me if any of it had ever been real. Not us. Me. She wanted reassurance that she hadn't misjudged everything. I told her the truth. I told her it was real until she decided it wasn't. I told her she didn't lose me because of one mistake. She lost me because she tried to erase me quietly and expected me to cooperate. She cried after that. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to be heard. I didn't move. A week later, the house went on the market. She protested. I showed her the clause she'd signed years ago without reading closely. The one that gave me final say in situations like this. Watching her realize she'd underestimated me from the start was the closest thing to satisfaction I allowed myself. Ryan sent one last message. He said he never meant for it to end like this. He said family should matter more than pride. I deleted it without replying. Because this was never about pride. It was about boundaries. And the people who crossed mine didn't get to define how the story ended. They thought I'd crumble quietly. They thought I'd beg for clarity or closure. What they didn't understand was simple. I didn't need closure. I needed distance. And I was just getting started. Distance changes things. It sharpens memory. It strips excuses down to their bones. Once Megan moved out and the house stopped feeling contaminated by her presence, I started seeing the past more clearly than I ever had while living inside it. There were signs I ignored because ignoring them was easier than accepting what they meant. Conversations redirected. Decisions made without me. Little jokes between her and Ryan that stopped when I walked into the room. None of it mattered then because I believed in the version of family I'd helped build. Belief has a way of blinding you when it's convenient. Megan moved into a short-term rental. She told people she needed space. She told them I'd pushed her away. I didn't correct her. I had learned something important by then. The truth doesn't need urgency. Lies do. My attorney called me one morning and said Megan's legal strategy had changed. She was no longer asking for a clean split. She was contesting, claiming emotional neglect, suggesting financial coercion, floating the idea that I had controlled more than money. I thanked him and told him to proceed. That afternoon, I forwarded him the files I'd been holding back. Messages, voice recordings, planning conversations that showed intent, coordination, and motive. Not just infidelity. Manipulation. My attorney went quiet for a moment after reviewing them. This won't go the way she thinks it will, he said. That night, my father called. His voice sounded older than I remembered. He didn't defend anyone. He didn't apologize either. He said he'd listened to the recording more than once. He said he didn't recognize the people speaking. I told him neither did I. He asked if there was any way back from this. I told him no. Not because I was angry, but because trust doesn't regrow once it's been harvested and sold. Ryan lost his job 2 weeks later. Not because of me directly. Because people talk. Because reputations move faster than explanations. Someone forwarded something they shouldn't have. Someone else asked questions. He called me drunk that night and left a voicemail blaming me for ruining his life. I didn't listen to the whole thing. Megan tried once more to meet in person. She said lawyers made everything ugly. She said we used to be able to talk. She asked if I could just sit down with her. No recording, no strategy. I told her that version of me was gone. The court date was set. Mediation failed before it began. Megan showed up confident, dressed like she was going to a presentation, not a negotiation. She kept glancing at me, waiting for a reaction. She didn't get one. When the mediator reviewed the evidence, the tone in the room changed. Megan's confidence thinned. Her lawyer stopped interrupting. I watched her realize, piece by piece, that the story she'd rehearsed had no traction in reality. For the first time since this started, she looked at me like she was seeing me clearly. And for the first time, she understood that whatever she thought she'd been planning, I had already moved past it. The process wasn't over. Not yet. But the balance had shifted. And everyone in that room felt it. I woke up to silence that felt heavier than any argument could ever make it. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee, but there was something bitter under it, a tension that had settled like dust in every corner. I knew she was awake too, Caitlin, but she hadn't moved yet. Not a sound, Not a single sign that the woman I loved was in the same room. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands gripping the sheets, trying to force my brain to stop spinning. 2 nights ago, I saw him. Jeremy. My own brother-in-law. I shouldn't have cared. I told myself that over and over. He's nothing to me. But I can still feel the slick, smug look he gave when he cornered Caitlin at that dinner. That smile she used to trust. That voice that promised friendship but carried the weight of betrayal. She didn't tell me the whole story, never did. But I've pieced enough together from her trembling answers, from the way she flinches whenever she hears his name, to know it was more than just a passing mistake. I remember the first time I caught them talking late at night, her in the doorway, him leaning against the wall like he owned the place. My stomach twisted so hard I could barely breathe. She froze when I walked in, eyes wide, guilt painted across her face like a brand. Jeremy didn't even flinch. The audacity of that man. He knew exactly what he was doing. Testing her, testing me, testing the boundaries of the family I thought I could trust. I couldn't speak then. Words were useless. Rage had me by the throat, suffocating everything else. I left that night, my hands shaking, my mind screaming. She followed me to the car, pleading, trying to explain, but nothing could make the images in my head disappear. I didn't care about her excuses. I didn't care about the love we'd built over the last 3 years. What mattered was that trust, the foundation I thought was unshakable, had been cracked by her hesitation, by his presence, by the lies that neither had yet confessed fully. For days I stayed distant, letting the anger simmer. I watched her through the corner of my eye, reading every micro-expression, every twitch of her fingers, every sigh that betrayed her composure. I needed the truth, the raw, unfiltered reality. She couldn't hide it forever. Not from me. And I wasn't going to pretend it didn't happen while my own heart beat with suspicion and hatred. Yesterday, I confronted her. Not in words, not yet. Just a look, a simple tilt of my head, letting my silence scream louder than any argument could. She froze, then finally, quietly, admitted the truth. It was worse than I imagined. More calculated, colder, and infinitely more humiliating. She had kept him close, maintained contact, even smiled at him behind my back at family gatherings. Every laugh, every casual remark, every handshake, it had been poisoned. And I was too blind to see it until now. I paced the living room, feeling the floorboards creak under my weight, each step echoing the violence of my thoughts. I thought of revenge, of the precise, surgical way I could dismantle both of them. Not physically, no. That would be too easy. But psychologically, emotionally, socially, I could ruin them from the inside out, make them wish they'd never crossed me. And maybe that's exactly what I would do. Because if someone betrayed me like that, in my own home, with my life and my family entwined, there could be no forgiveness. Only justice. Only the cold, unrelenting pursuit of equilibrium. Caitlin tried to reach for my hand. I slapped it away, not harshly, but with the weight of my judgment. She recoiled, eyes wide, tears threatening. I didn't feel pity. Not yet. Every lie she told, every secret kept, every smile for him while pretending loyalty to me, it all counted against her. She needed to understand that. And maybe Jeremy would too, once I was done. The text on my phone buzzed. A message from him. Short, clipped, almost smug. We need to talk. You can't avoid this forever. I stared at it, the blood in my veins freezing. I wanted to reply. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn every bridge they thought they could hide behind. But I didn't. I deleted it. I looked back at Caitlin. Her hands were trembling now, her lips pressed together like she was trying to hold in a confession that would never save her. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about me taking control, about rewriting the rules of our lives, about forcing both of them to feel the weight of what they had done. And I knew the first move would come tonight, when the house was quiet, when Jeremy thought he could strike without consequence. I had a plan. I had patience. And I had rage that could last longer than either of them could survive. And I was ready. The meeting happened in a place Ryan thought gave him an advantage. A quiet bar near the courthouse, all glass and neutral colors. The kind of place where people convince themselves they're being rational just because the lights are soft. He texted the address like he was doing me a favor. I arrived early. I always do now. Ryan walked in 10 minutes late, scanning the room until he saw me. He hesitated before sitting down. That hesitation mattered. It told me he already felt the shift, even if he didn't understand it yet. He started talking right away. About misunderstandings. About how things spiraled. About how Megan was vulnerable and how he'd only tried to help. He framed himself as collateral damage, as if events had happened around him instead of through him. I let him talk until his voice ran out of momentum. Then I told him I'd already submitted the supplemental evidence. His face tightened. He asked what evidence. I told him the truth. Not everything. Just enough. I told him about the recordings. The messages. The timeline that showed coordination. I told him his name appeared in places it shouldn't, tied to intent instead of coincidence. I watched his breathing change as he realized this wasn't a family argument anymore. This was exposure. He asked me what I wanted. That question said more than any confession ever could. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for terms. I told him I didn't want anything from him. That scared him more than if I had. He leaned back and tried one last angle. He said blood mattered. He said parents would never forgive me for tearing the family apart. He said I'd be alone when this was over. I told him I'd already been alone. I'd just been surrounded by people who benefited from my silence. I stood up and left him there with his drink untouched. The court date came faster than Megan expected. Her lawyer tried to regain footing, tried to frame things as emotional complexity instead of strategic betrayal. It didn't land. Facts don't care how carefully you rehearse them. They just sit there until someone reads them out loud. When the judge reviewed the evidence, Megan stopped looking at me. She stared straight ahead like if she didn't acknowledge my existence, I might disappear. She didn't cry this time. She went numb. The ruling wasn't dramatic. It was efficient. Asset division adjusted. Claims dismissed. Her attempt to paint me as unstable collapsed under her own words. The silence afterward felt clean. Outside the courtroom, she finally spoke to me. She said she never thought I'd go this far. She said she didn't recognize me anymore. I told her she never had. Ryan didn't show up that day. He sent a message instead. A long one. Apologetic. Self-pitying. He said he hoped someday I'd understand. I blocked his number. That night, I went back to the house one last time before closing. Empty rooms. No photos. No shared furniture. Just space. I walked through it slowly, not mourning, not celebrating. Just confirming that it was over. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like walking away with everything intact, while the people who tried to erase you are left explaining themselves forever. And for the first time since this began, I slept without listening for footsteps that weren't mine. The mornings after felt heavier than the nights. The quiet wasn't comforting anymore. It was accusatory. Every empty chair, every untouched coffee cup reminded me of what had been taken, and yet, paradoxically, what had been regained. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The faint scratch on the floor where her heel had scuffed the wood. The lock on the pantry that clicked differently when it shut. The way the sunlight hit the living room couch just so, like it had been waiting for me to see it alone. Megan's attempts at contact became erratic. Emails, short texts, vague apologies that didn't actually name anything. I ignored them all. Each time I didn't respond, I felt the tension coil tighter in my chest, like a spring refusing to release. I realized it wasn't guilt I felt for ignoring her. It was power. Power that had been stripped from me, piece by piece, now quietly, irreversibly returned. Then Ryan appeared again. I saw him at a distance in the grocery store, trying to pass by with his head down, but he couldn't hide it. There was fear in his eyes, the same fear that had flared during our bar confrontation. He reached for a wave, but I turned my cart and left the aisle, making sure our paths wouldn't cross. That was enough. That fear, that awareness that he'd lost control, was enough for me. A week later, I started receiving notices from a private investigator I had hired months earlier. They weren't legal threats or police reports. They were documentation. Every lie, every deviation from truth, every hidden meeting Megan and Ryan had orchestrated. Photos, receipts, timestamps. Small, mundane details that seemed harmless on their own, but when collected, created a web of betrayal so complete it could suffocate anyone in its center. I spread them carefully, strategically. Not to humiliate, not to punish for sport, but to establish a quiet, unavoidable reckoning. Megan's world began to shift under her own weight. Friends distanced themselves, unsure of which side of the story was real. Ryan started losing opportunities, his professional reputation eroding silently. Neither confrontation nor argument could fix it. I didn't need to touch them personally. I didn't need to yell or beg. The truth did all the work, meticulously, unrelentingly. And still, I wasn't finished. Every time I thought I'd reached the end, a memory surfaced. A smile, a careless word, a night she had thought I was asleep. Each one reminded me that the destruction had to be complete, not for revenge, but for closure. For understanding that betrayal cannot stand unchallenged if the world around it is to retain balance. I watched them from the shadows of my life's reconstruction, noting the cracks forming under the pressure. I didn't gloat. I didn't intervene. I just observed. That quiet observation, the knowledge that I had seen, recorded, and anticipated every move, was more powerful than any confrontation could ever be. And then the letter came. Unmarked, no return address, folded carefully and left at my door. Megan's handwriting. A single sentence. I see now what I've lost. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea. It was recognition, the first acknowledgement of the reality I had created around her. That acknowledgement felt like a key turning in a lock, and I realized then that the reckoning, finally, had found its shape. I set the letter down, unopened, and walked away from it. Not because I didn't care, but because I did. I cared enough to let the truth stand on its own. It would speak louder than any words I could ever write or say. The calm that followed wasn't relief. It was the quiet aftermath of a storm that had leveled everything around me, leaving only the structures I wanted to remain. Myself, my children, my dignity, and the knowledge that some betrayals, once fully exposed, cannot survive in silence. I didn't have to act anymore. They were already trapped in the consequences they had built, and I was free to move through the ruins as the architect of my own survival. The final confrontation was still ahead, though I didn't yet know how or when. But the anticipation itself was a weapon, sharper than any anger or hatred could ever be. I had learned that patience, observation, and precision could dismantle even the strongest of betrayals without ever lifting a hand. And that's when I realized the most devastating part. They would never see me coming, not until it was far too late. The day came without warning. Not a shout, not a knock, just the quiet inevitability I had been expecting. I watched Megan from the edge of the cafe where she used to meet Ryan after work. She didn't recognize me at first. The confidence that had once defined her was gone, replaced by uncertainty, the subtle twitch of someone used to hiding from consequences. She glanced around nervously, checking the entrance, scanning the tables. And then, finally, she saw me. Her eyes widened just slightly, the recognition settling in too late to matter. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I let the weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the evidence she knew I had, all hang between us like a physical force. She could feel it, like the air before a storm breaks. I didn't, she began, but I cut her off with a slow shake of my head. Words were useless. Everything she had done, every deceit, had already spoken louder than any apology or explanation could. I walked past her, deliberately, letting my shadow cross hers, making sure she felt my presence without my touching her. She flinched, the first honest reaction she had shown in months. The power had shifted. For the first time, she understood that this wasn't about punishment. Not really. It was about justice delivered in the quiet, inevitable way it had always been meant to arrive. Ryan's call came later that evening. He had been watching her, trying to find a way back in, and he realized too late that the pattern I had laid out would never allow it. Every move he tried was anticipated, documented, neutralized. His threats were meaningless. He had already lost. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply existed in the calm aftermath, knowing that the balance had been restored. My children were safe, my dignity intact, and Megan and Ryan had been forced into a reckoning they could not escape. That was enough. Weeks later, I watched Megan pack her things from the house she had once thought she owned, her movements slow, deliberate, careful. There was no dramatics, no tantrums, just the quiet surrender of someone finally understanding the magnitude of their mistakes. I observed from the doorway, letting her see me if she chose, letting her feel the full weight of accountability. And when she left for the last time, I closed the door gently behind her. Not out of forgiveness, not out of mercy, but out of necessity. Because the story had ended, the chapter closed, and the silence that followed was the truest measure of all that had been lost. and all that had been reclaimed. In the nights that followed, I slept without the tension that had been my constant companion for months. My life, once fractured, had rebuilt itself around what mattered: honesty, integrity, family. And while the echoes of betrayal would never fully vanish, they no longer had the power to define me. I had survived, not through rage, but through precision. Not through violence, but through patience. Not through mercy, but through understanding. And in that survival, I discovered something no betrayal could ever steal: the unshakable knowledge that some wrongs, when confronted with unwavering resolve, cannot stand. I stepped outside, letting the cool night air wash over me, and finally, for the first time in a long time, I felt the quiet certainty that I was free. The story had ended. The justice had been served. And I remained, unchanged, unbroken, untouchable. The storm had passed. I had survived it. And nothing, not even betrayal, could ever threaten that again.